Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. And today's episode is Bleach Soul Society, the Sneak Entry Arc, Episode 26, Formation, the Worst Tag. Episode in a nutshell is just a brief reminder of what happens in this episode. So, in this episode, we pick up where the last one left off. Everybody is splitting apart into the four beams of light. We have Chad, who lands and uses his special arm to cushion his landing before quickly taking shelter. Then we have Ishida and and Inoue uses her powers to help cushion their landing, though ends up injured in the process in her shoulder, which anyone who's been watching this series knows that this, not so much recently, but especially at the start of the series, everybody got shoulder wounds, and now Inoue once again has a shoulder wound, which Ishida bandages up for her. Then we have Yoruichi, who ended up on their own as well, and considers that that might actually be better. She almost runs into Kira, but manages to, at the last second, kind of deviate her path and lands on a roof instead. And then the main bulk of this episode is taken up with Ganju and Ichigo. Ganju manages to cushion their language using a seppa to turn the stone into sand so they have a semi-soft landing. They then, of course, have their arguments once they've landed, which are interrupted by Ikaku and Yumichika, who are both part of Squad 11 and consider it their lucky day to have run into the invaders, and they'll get rewarded if they kill the invaders. So Ikaku kind of makes a dorky showing by doing a luck dance upon seeing them, and then gets kind of upset that they weren't like reacting differently to his dance. Anyways, Ganju realizes that both of them are stronger than he is, tries to urge Ichigo into running, but Ichigo refuses, and so he then runs off and is chased by Yumichika, whereas Ikaku stays back to fight Ichigo. They then kind of have their opening fight. They both end up with forehead wounds, but Ikaku has medicine available to him, which Ichigo doesn't have, and he accuses him of cheating, which Ikaku denies, saying that it's just better preparedness and knowledge. And they go back and forth. As they're fighting, Ikaku realizes that Ichigo, while somewhat amateurish, also has skill and asks who his master is, and while Ichigo says he only learned under him for like a few days, so he wouldn't really call him his master, he did end up fighting with Urahara, and Ikaku actually recognizes Urahara's name and says that if that's your master, then it would be, rude of me not to go all out, and then he unleashes his sword. Hozukimaru, who ends up being what looks at first like a spear, which Ichigo treats it like a spear, getting past the blade and then going for Ikaku. However, then it ends up breaking into three and coming back around at him, and it turns out it's actually like a three-part staff, so it has like more maneuverability. And he ends up getting Ichigo in the arm, so Ichigo then wraps the bandages of his sword around his arm, basically bandaging his sword to his hand, so that they can then continue the fight. And that's basically the point their fight gets to before the episode ends. Meanwhile, Ganju, of course, is running, and he's using his seppa to basically turn all like a circle of the wall into sand so that he can keep running through it. Unfortunately, he does eventually run into a execution pit, And that is when Yumachika manages to catch up. And when he catches up, he basically taunts him for being ugly because, he's very into his own vanity. And Ganju basically throws sand in his face to try to get away, turns the ground to sand, making Yumichika retreat briefly, but he ends up also causing himself to fall into the pit, but that was a fake out because he had an extra cannonball and floats up. So then Yumichika unlocks his sword, which is the Fuji Kujaku, which I believe means Azure Peacock or Wisteria Peacock. Depends on the translation, or I think there's two names for it. Either way, it's named a peacock, which is awesome. And he then attacks the cannon, which of course causes it to explode. Ganju takes advantage of the burst to get to the other side of the pit, leaving Yumachika on the other side. And then Ganju, of course, then resumes his running. And Yumachika is going to resume his pursuit, but that's where we get in the point of that fight at the end of the episode. So now that we've been reminded about what happened in the episode, we'll now rank the episode on our two ranking lists, the mostly objective ranking list, followed by the personal ranking list. So on our mostly objective ranking list, I have highlighted the rank values I thought applied to this episode. First, we of course have our resolved subplot. They have now all officially entered the Court of Pure Souls, and they are all successfully landed. So that whole saga to get there and enter there and begin their mission completed. Mission is a go. They are where they need to be. So that is worth 2 points. Then we, of course, had our multi-arc supporting character introductions. And of course, we had Ikaku Madarame, Yumachika Ayasagawa, and then Izuru Kira. And they're each worth 3 points, bringing us to 11 so far. And then we have our multi-arc supporting character growth, and this is of course Ganju revealing yet another spell that he is capable of using, and that is the Seppa, which stands for Stone Wave, which turns stone into sand. And that's also worth 3 points. I didn't think that there were any negatives particularly that applied to this episode. I mean, they do joke when Ikaku uses the cauterizing medicine on his eyebrow wound. Ichigo accuses him of cheating, but that's a false accusation. He wasn't actually cheating. You're allowed to use what weapons you have available to you and what resources you have available to you in a real fight. So I didn't take any points, but I did honorably mention it because I felt like it. So that brings us then to 14. And as the maximum score in our mostly objective ranking is a 10, that makes this a 10 out of 10 episode. So next we come to our arc ranking so far, and as always, when our mostly objective ranking has more than one with the same score, they're ranked in the episode order. So in first we have Enter the World of the Shinigami, The Man Who Hates Shinigami, Assemble the Gotai 13, Formation, The Worst Tag. This episode is in 4th place. Then we have 14 Days Before Rukia's Execution and Penetrate the Center with an Enormous Bombshell. So now we come to my personal ranking. And basically, obviously, first part of the episode, everybody's landing. We're getting a touch base with where everybody ended up. Nothing really interesting about that, though. But I do like Ikaku and Yumachika as characters. I think they are some of the better characters that do recur throughout the series. So I am happy to see them. As anybody who's been watching this channel for a while would know, I do have a very strong bias towards anything associated to peacocks because they're my favorite bird. And so the fact that Yumachika's sword, like Zanpakuto, is named Fujikujaku, which part of that is peacock, automatically makes him one of my favorite characters and makes his sword one of my favorites. Now, I don't want to spoil it, but obviously his fan of swords is Fate, and his true sword is so much better and very amazing. But we rarely get to see it, which is unfortunate. But even like the way that the sword kind of fans out into like multiple blades to represent like the fan of a peacock, absolutely love that. Ikaku's luck dance was that was really cringy, but that's what made it funny. And then Ganju, I feel like he's there for comedic relief, but I don't know, he's not my favorite character to be honest. Though I did think that his episode like turning things like the stone to sand, very cool, especially since they had to give him something since he's not a Shinigami, so he doesn't have his Zanpakuto like everybody else. So I do think that that is a pretty neat spell that he has. Now, I'll admit, I do appreciate that we are finally getting a variety of wounds in our fights. That everything isn't a shoulder wound because in season, or not season, but arc one, like the first arc, Agent of the Shinigami arc, we got shoulder wounds. Like anytime there was a fight, there was a shoulder wound. But I also found that really quirky and I really enjoyed counting and calling out all the shoulder wounds. So I feel like it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's like disappointment because I was enjoying the fact that it was always a shoulder wound and calling it out. But on the other hand, it is nice to have a variety of wounds, and we still got a shoulder wound with Inoue because she was harmed in the shoulder when she landed, so it's not like they've completely abandoned it. But I did want to point that out as well. Both of the fights are fun, but they are just getting started because it's a multi-episode fight. They're still kind of testing each other, revealing their cards, things like that. And so while it is fun that they're fighting and it is, tension building that they're fighting, it's also a lot of like attack, separate, talk a bit, attack again. And of course, one thing with a lot of like shonen style anime and manga and such, they go by the philosophy of you have to lose to win, so they always kind of start a fight getting injured, maybe not showing the best performance, and then as they're pushed in the fight, they eventually will then find their second wind and their power and then come back and win. And well, they're at the part where they're losing. So, well, not so much Ganju, but for Ichigo, he's already got a head wound, he's already got a hand wound. Meanwhile, Ikaku got one forehead wound that he had medication available to stop the bleeding, so really, they're not really on even footing at this point because you've got to start to lose and then pull a second wind out and win. So that's a bit disappointing as well. Overall, I decided to give it a 7 out of 10 because there were comedic moments. I really like the characters that were introduced. Um, I like Yumachika's sword because peacocks, love that. Um, but again, fights are just getting started. People getting kind of starting on the weaker end before coming back and making it to the higher end. Ganju's one was more like a chase scene and it was meant to be comedic, but really he just kind of comes off like I don't know, there's just something about Ganju a little too rough around the edges. Not a big fan. So again, 7 out of 10 I felt was fair. Which brings our ranking so far to first, Enter the World of the Shinigami, second, Formation, the worst tag, third, Penetrate the Center with an Enormous Bombshell. I don't know why that episode title makes me laugh. It does. And then Assemble the Gotai 13. Fifth, we have 14 Days Before Rukia's Execution. And then in sixth, The Man Who Hates Shinigami. bringing us now to our final segment, which is our series ranking so far. And on our objective ranking, Agent of the Shinigami arc came in at 84%, and the Soul Society, the sneak entry arc so far has a score of 55 out of 210, which is our possible maximum score, or maximum score possible. And then the personal ranking side, we had Agent of the Shinigami arc coming in at 63%, and the Soul Society, the sneak entry arc so far having 38 points out of a possible 210. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Bleach Soul Society, the sneak entry arc, episode 26, Formation, the worst tag. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.